Welcome back, everyone. We're here today with our Total Wellness Tuesday episode here on the Cabral Concept. Great to have you, of course, as always. Appreciate the support, the listens, the subscribes, and, of course, all those reviews. So thank you so much. And as we get started with today's show, I want to let you know that we do talk a lot about intermittent fasting in terms of how it benefits our overall health. Meaning, okay, yes, it may be able to help with Alzheimer's and dementia. We certainly know that it helps with autophagy, so it helps with cleaning up our cellular system, essentially the milieu, which is all the fluid in and around our cells. A lot of us don't like to think so, but all of our cells give off waste. Believe it or not, with 40 trillion cells in this body, they are giving off waste. And that means they're taking in nutrients and they're all giving out waste. They're basically little ecosystems of ourselves, right, inside of us. So we need that cleanup, and of course, that takes place to a greater degree while we're fasting. And of course, many people are using intermittent fasting in terms of a body transformation or a weight loss based tool. I've talked about that on previous shows. We have to be careful that if we're doing long intermittent fast, that we have to make sure that we are keeping some type of resistance based exercise in our weekly routines. Doesn't have to be every day, but 3 times a week or so in order to make sure that you are not stripping away the muscle mass. I'm going to link that up today. All the studies, the research, and the show notes to previous shows that you definitely want to tune into will be at stephencabral.com/1992. We always link up the video there as well. So if you want to watch this on video, you're welcome to right on YouTube or on my website. So intermittent fasting, one of the most powerful tools we have for health and wellness, the fountain of youth, as they say, closest thing we have to that right now, but it may also help with, and this is really important, our overall mental health and our mood. So let's take a look at this newer study and be able to break it down for you. And I'm actually going to link up the whole study for you. The nice thing is that if you're into health and you're into the science behind it, this is an 8-page paper that's really well written. I don't even know if that's proper English, but their English, I'm sure, is better inside of this paper. Really well written on all of the intricacies of the effect of intermittent fasting on brain neurotransmitters, neutrophil phagocytic activity, and histopathological findings in organs in rats. Okay, so it's a mouse-based study, rat-based study. That's typically how most of these studies are conducted, especially when they're of this type of sensitive nature. So, but again, the studies always start here. Do we need more findings and more research in the future? 100%. But we're not going to move towards clinical human-based trials until we start to prove these things out in rats. And so when you look at neutrophil phagocytic activity, all we're really talking about is autophagy right there. We're talking about white blood cells. We're talking about phagocytosis, which is the cellular cleanup inside of our body. Then we'll look at some of the blood as well with the histopathological findings. So our job today, though, is really to look at the neurotransmitters, such as norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. All right, and just a quick course on what those are. Norepinephrine is the start to our sympathetic nervous system fight or flight activity. And how that happens is that when there's a stressor on the body, we increase norepinephrine as part of what's called the HPA axis. This is where our hypothalamus inside of our brain tells our pituitary gland inside of our brain to have the adrenals secrete a neurotransmitter. Believe it or not, it's a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine, right? A lot of us hear it as adrenaline, that type of hormone, or I should say neurotransmitter inside the body. And then directly after that, what follows is typically cortisol. And cortisol is typically produced to bring up free sugar inside of the blood to use that as a fast fuel source while we're in fight or flight, right? Really important. So why this is so important is that, believe it or not, even if you are not doing any stressful activity, you could be mentally stressed and your body will break down liver glycogen or even muscle tissue in order to raise blood sugar levels. So we have to be careful with that, right? Stress is a big thing in our life. Now, in terms of serotonin, we typically think of that as the happy, feel-good neurotransmitter, right? So if we don't have enough serotonin, we might be dealing with depression or low mood or more irritability. anything on the lower side, right? Low ambition, low drive. Same, dopamine is not dissimilar, right? They definitely go together in those Venn diagrams, because low dopamine can be low ambition, low mood, low drive. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter associated with reward and pleasure, right? So when we're driven to accomplish something, we typically have higher levels of dopamine, right? And so those are three main neurotransmitters that they looked at in this study. They didn't look at GABA and a few others, which is more based towards anxiety, but I think they did an overall really good job. So let's go through this because not all neurotransmitters got a positive result from fasting. So let's see which ones did. So this fast, by the way, I always like to give you a little bit of the, how this took place. And so here it is. So this is direct, this is an abstract direct from the study. And again, I'm going to link this up for you. It said, many previous studies had differed in answering the question if fasting has benefits or drawbacks. This work carried out on animal models to evaluate the impact of intermittent fasting on body and organ weight, hematological parameters, neutrophil phagocytic activity, brain neurotransmitters, some hepatic, renal, and spleen parameters as well. All right, they looked at 10 rats in each group. And one group was in intermittent fast for 12 hours, and the other was just their typical control that could eat as they wished. So they looked at fluctuations in body weight, organ weight, and they also looked at some of those neurotransmitters. For our use today, we're actually going to look at what happened with those neurotransmitters. And it's very straightforward, which is really nice to see. And I think that this correlates really well with what happens in humans as well. But again, I will let you be the judge. And of course, more follow-up studies are certainly needed. So besides the evidence we already knew, which is intermittent fasting is great at helping with phagocytosis, which is basically cellular cleanup that we know helps with potentially cancer prevention and maybe staving off Alzheimer's and dementia, what we found was this. In terms of serotonin, there was an increase production of neurotransmitters of serotonin. Now, this is really interesting. I'm going to give you my thoughts on this because the researchers that conducted the study, they can only tell you what happened, and then they give you their thoughts as well. But what I want to do for you is actually provide maybe some basis as to why this actually happened. So the rats got a boost while fasted for those 12 hours, they took their blood at the end, in serotonin-based markers. So really, really interesting as we look at this. Dopamine did not greatly increase. So not clinically significant, slight, but not clinically significant. All right, so we have an increase in our happy, feel-good neurotransmitter, not so much though in dopamine. And then we had the largest rise in a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. And if you remember from just a couple minutes ago, that is the one that signals, okay, sympathetic nervous system dominance, we're in fight or flight, it is time to go, right? It gives us a little bit of a surge of energy. So when I looked at this, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I did assume that dopamine would have been elevated as well, because dopamine, if you're starving, and again, it's only 12 hours, right? But if they did this for 36 hours, would dopamine increase? Potentially, right? Potentially, or neurotransmitters actually may start to go down like dopamine to conserve output, to conserve energy, right? So there's a couple interesting reasons as to why dopamine may not have increased, right? You're not actually getting any type of reward from fasting that you know of, right? You're actually kind of eliminating, you're taking away food. So would dopamine go down because of that? Potentially, yeah, absolutely. Or, if you're in the sympathetic nervous system, dopamine could be elevated. It certainly could. If you're driven and do something, you're in that sympathetic nervous system, dopamine would be elevated. However, if the mind is not necessarily driven to do something, would dopamine be elevated in the brain because it's typically produced there? And the answer would be probably not. So again, I think more research and study could be done on this in terms of dopamine and fasting. I would love to see this, but for right now, and I have a whole podcast on dopamine, so why don't I link that up as well? If you're unfamiliar with dopamine, honestly, definitely get familiar with it because dopamine is what gives you zest for life. It really does. It's what wakes you up and says, okay, it's time to get after it today, right? Like today's going to be a good day. Here's what I want to accomplish. So that's dopamine in a nutshell. Now, serotonin, I loved seeing that serotonin was elevated here. Now, two possible reasons that I see, and I would love to hear from you in the comments as well. If you have another idea, another thought, love to hear from you, without a doubt. We always keep our minds open to all possibilities. So there's a possibility that when you're fasting, we don't have a lot of new food coming in, we don't have a whole lot of digestion taking place. We know serotonin is predominantly produced in the intestines. Does it make its way to the rest of the body and the brain? Yes, it does. But it's predominantly produced in the intestines. So what does that mean? Well, if it's predominantly produced in the intestines, we don't have new food coming in. Could it be easier to produce the serotonin when more new food isn't being taken in and all that peristaltic movement's happening? Maybe. However, we do know that eating also triggers serotonin, but it's more the taste and the filling of the stomach and the satiation and the happiness that comes with the eating that boosts serotonin. So I think that's interesting to look at. Would serotonin continue to increase 24 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours? Again, I'd love to see those studies that show that. So there could be a positive with no food in the stomach. Or I should say, less in the intestines. It's there. There's no doubt about it. Food isn't completely gone from your stomach in 12 hours. It's actually just moving its way to the colon. So typically, your food that went into your mouth is coming out the other side in 12 to 24 hours. That's the typical. Some people, not for 24 to 36 hours, that have slower peristaltic movement. Okay, that's not a good thing. Now, there's also the possibility that fasting improved the conversion of tryptophan, an amino acid, to serotonin. So there's also the possibility that tryptophan conversion increases with intermittent fasting. Again, I can't give you that definitive answer, but that's a definite possibility, and that would be a great thing. Now, there's a negative possibility, and the negative is this. Are serotonin levels artificially increased because the body is dealing with sympathetic nervous system stress, designated by that high norepinephrine marker? Meaning this, if you're in a state of fight or flight, in the short term, does serotonin increase exponentially due to the fact that it needs to calm the nervous system? Meaning, like, if you're pushing down really hard on the go, go, go lever, the gas pedal, does serotonin get the signal from your body to be made in order to start to press that brake to calm your body down so it doesn't burn out? Another possibility. I think all three are valid, and there are probably a couple other ways to look at this as well. But we know, at least in the short term, you could definitely get a boost the next morning from intermittent fasting for 12 hours, and I highly recommend it for 99% of people. Stop eating around 5 or 6 at night, starting again at 6, 7, 8 in the morning or so. And some people can go a little bit longer. Again, check out who can go longer on previous intermittent fasting podcasts. Okay. So we have one more neurotransmitter called norepinephrine. We talked about that previous. A lot of people confuse it specifically with a hormone. If you called it a hormone, I'd be okay with that. Really, it's semantics, but we're looking at it as its effect in the body. And norepinephrine is something we test actually on a neurotransmitter-based test, a simple urine-based test. Anyone can do it right at home to look at your neurotransmitter levels. And if you have something off with your mood, I definitely recommend checking that out. We'll link it up here today, how you can run your own neurotransmitter test right at home. Head on over to stephencabral.com/1992. Okay, so norepinephrine, that's our fight or flight. That is our go, go, go. That's our stress-based excitatory neurotransmitter is called, and it gives us energy in the short term, which is great. So basically, it's like getting a shot of adrenaline, right? Our natural shot of adrenaline produced by those adrenals, and the body is revved up to go. That makes sense, and here's why. The body potentially is dropping into a state of lower blood sugar, hypoglycemia, or just moving down into the 70s, and your body's saying, okay, it's getting pretty close to the time to start breaking down liver glycogen because we've been fasting for a while, and we need to make some fuel, right? As the body gets into hypoglycemia, it naturally will produce more stress hormones or norepinephrine in order to signal that HPA axis to start the second part, which is releasing glucocorticoids, and we call that cortisol. That breaks down our liver glycogen, or whatever type of fuel that it needs, which again is going to be that faster fuel source because you're in a state of stress. So good and bad, right? Good and bad that norepinephrine, that increase in norepinephrine can help in short-term immunity. It can help with fat burning, which is really nice because you're not just burning sugar, you're also burning body fat. And then potentially detrimental. That's why, again, I like to give you both sides of this. I do believe that, for a lot of people that are just doing one meal a day, you can really get away with it in your 20s. But after that, chronic stress in the body, chronic sympathetic nervous system dominance. And we know, this has been proven over and over. I mean, I don't know if there's hundreds, but I've read dozens of studies that intermittent fasting increases norepinephrine. All right, so if you're constantly increasing norepinephrine, and I'm going to save this topic for another show, but if you're constantly increasing norepinephrine, it means you're constantly putting yourself in a state of fight or flight. So we need to be careful with that, right? It's a double-edged sword. We can boost things in the short term. That's great for energy. That's great for fat burning. That's great for boosting, the brain happiness, all that. But what happens in the long term, right? You can only produce that norepinephrine chronically for so long before the body begins to become a little bit burnt out. So we'll save that for another show, but at least in the short term, which is how we should be using intermittent fasting. Now, again, you know that I'm not against 2-3 day intermittent fast every quarter or so. I'm not against even longer fast, maybe once a year, but I'm just talking about every single day, right? So intermittent fasting every single day, somewhere between 12 to 16 hours seems to be the sweet spot. A couple times a week might be a 24-hour fast. Once a quarter might be a couple days. But again, go back to my previous podcast because I really go into this in depth. I let the science speak. And then, of course, I like to look at all the different facets of intermittent fasting. And in this case, we're talking about boosting brain power and neurotransmitters. So I'll tell you right now, if you are not using intermittent fasting to boost mood, I do recommend it. We're getting a boost in 2 neurotransmitters, serotonin, the happy feel-good neurotransmitter, and norepinephrine, the get up and go, let's get something done today neurotransmitter. So again, I will link up the study and the notes at stephencabral.com/1992, stephencabral.com/1992. Of course, if this show is helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone else you believe it could serve. Take care, everyone.